Welcome to Declassified Deep Dive, where unredacted files reveal hidden truths. Let's uncover the secrets. I'm your host, Raj, and each week we explore a new secret deep dive.
Okay, so for this deep dive, you've given us quite the collection of sources.
Yeah.
Declassified documents, historical analysis, even a ghost story in there for good measure.
Right.
Clearly, you're looking for more than a surface-level understanding of U.S. involvement in Chile leading up to that 1973 coup.
Absolutely.
You want the how, not just the what.
Exactly.
You want to understand the mechanisms, the levers of power, the covert operations.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to get into those details.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride, so strap in. Because what we're about to uncover is part Cold War thriller and part cautionary tale.
I think that's a great way to put it. And what makes this deep dive so compelling
Yeah.
is we're going beyond the textbook narratives.
Right.
We're actually diving into those primary sources, the raw, unfiltered materials of history.
Love it.
So we're talking CIA memos, we're talking meeting notes, even whispers of economic sabotage.
Wow.
This is how we piece together not just the events themselves, but the motivations behind them.
Right. The undercurrents of decision-making that really shaped what happened.
It's all about context, right?
Exactly.
So let's set the scene.
Okay.
It's 1970. Picture the world holding its breath as this Cold War drama plays out.
Right.
The U.S. understandably is on high alert about the spread of communism. And then, bam, Salvador Allende, a Marxist promising socialist reforms, wins the Chilean presidential election.
Huge shift.
No more missionaries and fruit, as they used to say, right?
You can practically hear the ice cracking in Washington.
Right.
You know, just a decade earlier, the Cuban Revolution had thrown the U.S.'s backyard into turmoil.
Yeah.
And the idea of another communist foothold in Latin America,
Oh, yeah.
especially one with potential Soviet ties, that was a nightmare scenario for them.
Right. So how does the U.S., this bastion of democracy, respond to this democratically elected leader?
Right.
Diplomacy détente, no full-on covert ops. I mean, Nixon's own words straight from those declassified CIA notes.
1 in 10 chance, perhaps, but save Chile.
Wow.
Make the economy scream.
Chilling stuff.
Chilling stuff.
Those weren't just strong words. Those were a directive.
Yeah.
Nixon's administration was prepared to use economic warfare to inflict real hardship on Chile, to either force Allende out or manufacture a crisis severe enough to justify intervention.
I mean, they had the levers to pull, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't just rhetoric. They leaned on U.S. businesses to withdraw investments.
Right.
They choked off international loans that Chile desperately needed. And they even fueled rumors of economic collapse.
They did.
They were aiming to create panic, a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure.
And, you know, it had a devastating impact.
Great.
Look at the copper industry, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Chile was the world's leading copper producer.
Right.
But U.S. pressure led to production plummets and price manipulations. And that's not abstract economics. That's livelihoods lost. That's families struggling, a nation feeling the squeeze.
It's such a stark example of how economic warfare, even without bombs and bullets, can inflict real pain.
Absolutely.
It's a form of control. As potent as any military action.
Right.
Maybe even more insidious because it's harder to pinpoint, right?
Absolutely. It's harder to trace.
And running parallel to this economic squeeze was the CIA's covert operation.
Oh, yeah.
Project FUBELT.
A classic.
A two-pronged plan that escalated as the situation evolved.
Right. A two-track plan.
So FUBELT was basically the cloak and dagger arm of the U.S.'s Chile strategy.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
They were playing both sides of the field, political maneuvering and outright coup plotting.
Exactly. Track I was the softer approach,
Yep.
using political influence to try and block Allende's confirmation in Congress, hoping to trigger new elections. But when that faltered, they had track second waiting in the wings.
Right.
A military coup, plain and simple.
Wow. And here's where it gets really interesting.
It does.
They needed a spark, a catalyst. Enter General René Schneider, Commander-in-Chief of the Chilean Army.
Right.
A staunch constitutionalist, a major roadblock for the CIA.
Huge roadblock.
Schneider was a figure of immense respect within the Chilean military.
Absolutely.
Deeply committed to democratic processes, absolutely opposed to military intervention in politics.
He was a true wild card in their game.
Right. And the CIA, seeing him as the linchpin, decided to get him out of the picture.
Wow.
We're talking kidnapping, even assassination plots. straight out of a spy novel.
Yeah, it's incredible.
A genesis of Project FUBELT memo lays it out. The decision to kidnap Schneider was made to create chaos.
Right.
Pin the blame on Allende's supporters and provide that justification for a military takeover.
It's a classic strategy.
So you're thinking, okay, they snatch the general coup goes off without a hitch. Pinochet steps in.
Right. Seems straightforward.
But hold on, because history rarely follows a straight line.
That's for sure.
You're right, the kidnapping attempt went terribly wrong. Instead of being taken hostage, Schneider was shot during the struggle and died a few days later.
Wow, talk about unintended consequences.
It seems their plan backfired spectacularly.
It did. Instead of triggering the coup, Schneider's death ignited public outrage.
Oh, wow.
He became a martyr for democracy, a symbol of resistance against foreign meddling.
Wow.
The coup was delayed, but the story, unfortunately, wasn't over.
And it's this turning point where we have to pause and consider the audacity of it all. A democratically elected leader, a foreign power, actively working to undermine him.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
That's the question.
Stay with us as we uncover the next chapter of this Chilean saga.
It's gonna be a wild ride.
So we left off with a failed kidnapping, a dead general, and Allende is still in power.
Right.
You'd think that would be a wake-up call for the U.S., but nope.
Yeah.
They doubled down. They shifted gears to a long game of destabilization.
They were persistent.
It's like they couldn't let go of this idea that they knew what was best for Chile, even if it meant undermining its democracy.
It's important to understand the mindset in Washington at the time.
Right.
They saw the world through this Cold War lens.
Yeah.
And to them, Allende's socialist government was a domino teetering, a potential gateway for Soviet influence in the region.
Yeah.
They were determined to stop that domino from falling, whatever the cost.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this destabilization campaign.
Sure.
What were the tactics, the tools of this covert war?
Well, it was a multi-pronged assault. Economic sabotage, political manipulation, propaganda. They were essentially aiming to create a climate of fear and uncertainty.
Right.
Eroding public trust in Allende's government and setting the stage for his eventual downfall.
So it's one thing to say they wanted to make the economy scream, but how did that actually play out?
Right.
Give us some specifics.
Let's take a look at the trucking industry.
Yeah.
In 1972, truck owners with covert support from the CIA launched a crippling strike that paralyzed the country. Food and supplies couldn't get where they needed to go. Factories shut down, shelves went empty.
Wow.
It was chaos, and it hit ordinary Chileans hard.
You can practically feel the tension rising just hearing about it.
Yeah.
It's almost like they were trying to engineer a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Predict chaos.
Yeah.
Then make it happen, then point to it as proof that Allende's government couldn't handle things.
It's a classic destabilization tactic.
Yeah.
And they weren't shy about using it. They funded opposition groups from conservative political parties to right-wing paramilitaries, funneling money and resources to those who opposed Allende.
I'm looking at this declassified State Department memo from 1971.
Yeah.
And it's pretty blatant about their efforts to manipulate Chilean politics.
It is.
They were literally discussing which opposition candidates to back, how to funnel money to their campaigns, even how to discredit Allende's allies.
It's striking how openly they discuss these interventions. These covert operations that were designed to subvert the will of the Chilean people.
It wasn't just about promoting U.S. interests.
No.
It was about actively preventing anything that could challenge those interests.
Exactly.
And we can't forget about the propaganda war.
Oh, yeah, that was huge.
They weren't just whispering in the back rooms. They were shouting from the rooftops, using media both in Chile and internationally to control the narrative.
The CIA was heavily involved in supporting right-wing newspapers and radio stations in Chile.
Oh, wow.
They even funded a propaganda magazine called El Mercurio.
Really?
Which constantly attacked Allende, accusing him of being a dictator, a communist puppet, a threat to democracy.
The irony is almost too much to bear.
I know, it's incredible.
They were accusing Allende of being a threat to democracy.
Right.
While actively working to undermine his democratically elected government.
It was a masterclass in disinformation.
Yeah.
And it had a real impact they were playing on Cold War anxieties.
Yeah.
Tapping into existing social divisions and creating a climate of fear and suspicion.
Right.
That made it easier to justify more drastic action.
It's a chilling reminder that information is power.
Absolutely.
And that controlling the narrative can be as effective as any weapon.
More effective in some way.
Right. And if we zoom out and look at the broader context, we see that Chile wasn't an isolated incident.
No, not at all.
The U.S. was using similar tactics throughout Latin America during the Cold War.
Right.
Supporting coups, propping up dictators.
Yep.
Anything to prevent the spread of communism.
It was a pattern.
It's a dark pattern, and it raises some serious questions about the U.S.'s role in the world.
Yeah.
Were they really acting as defenders of democracy?
That's the question.
Or were they more interested in protecting their own interests, even if it meant sacrificing the freedoms of others?
It's a question that historians and political scientists are still debating.
Right.
But what's clear from the sources we have is that the U.S. was willing to use its power, both overt and covert, to shape events in Chile and beyond.
So with the economy in shambles, political tensions rising, and a constant drumbeat of propaganda eroding public support, Allende's government is hanging by a thread.
And you can practically feel the noose tightening.
Yeah.
But despite all the pressure, Allende manages to hold on for 3 years.
Wow.
He was a shrewd politician, a charismatic leader, and he still had a significant base of support among the Chilean people.
So what ultimately led to his downfall?
Right.
What was the final straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah.
So we've been tracing this tangled web of U.S. involvement in Chile.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're reaching that tragic climax. Allende, battered by economic warfare and political sabotage, it's still clinging to power.
Yeah.
What finally tips the scales toward the coup?
Well, it's a convergence of pressures, both internal and external.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. had undoubtedly weakened Allende's government, but his reforms also faced resistance from within Chile itself. His attempts to nationalize industries, redistribute land, and implement socialist policies.
Yeah.
You know, these things sparked anxieties among the wealthy and powerful.
Right. And let's not forget the Chilean military.
Oh, a key player.
A force deeply suspicious of Allende from the start.
Absolutely.
I mean, the U.S. had been cultivating relationships with key military figures for years. Almost as insurance if their other plans went sideways.
Precisely. They'd been laying the groundwork, providing training, fostering a sense of shared ideology, or at least a shared enemy in communism.
Right.
By 1973, a significant portion of the Chilean military was primed for action.
Wow.
They saw a coup as the only way to save Chile from Allende's socialist path.
So September 11, 1973.
A date etched in history.
The coup unfolds. Allende dies in the presidential palace, either by suicide or in a firefight.
Right. The circumstances are still debated.
Depending on which account you believe. And General Augusto Pinochet, the man the U.S. had been courting, steps into the void. It's almost Shakespearean, this tragic fall from grace.
While the U.S. might not have directly orchestrated the events of that day.
Right.
They'd spent years creating the conditions that made it possible.
Yeah, it's like they built the stage, provided the props, even wrote the script, and then claimed they had nothing to do with the performance.
A very convenient position to take.
In the aftermath, I mean, Chile plunges into a dictatorship that lasts for 17 years.
A dark period.
Pinochet's regime is brutal. Thousands in prison, tortured, disappeared.
The human cost is staggering.
It really is.
Yeah.
How did the U.S., this supposed champion of freedom and democracy, respond to such blatant human rights violations?
It's a complex and, frankly, shameful chapter in U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
Initially, there was a muted response, almost an acceptance. Remember, this was the height of the Cold War.
Right.
To the Nixon administration, Pinochet, despite his brutality, was a bulwark against communism, a strategic asset.
So realpolitik trumped human rights.
It's a chilling calculus.
It really is.
But as Pinochet's abuses mounted, even within the U.S. government, there were voices of dissent. Some officials in the State Department and even the U.S. Embassy in Chile began expressing concerns, pushing for a tougher stance, maybe even sanctions.
I'm looking at a declassified cable from the U.S. ambassador to Chile in 1975.
Yeah.
And he's using words like barbaric and unconscionable to describe Pinochet's actions.
Right, but those voices were often drowned out by those who prioritized Cold War strategy above all else.
Wow.
They argued that alienating Pinochet would push him closer to the Soviets.
Right.
That stability, even if brutally enforced, was preferable to the unknown.
So this internal tug-of-war within the U.S. government played out while Chileans suffered under a brutal dictatorship.
It's a tragic situation.
It makes you question whose interests were really being served.
It does raise some fundamental questions.
And the long-term impacts, I mean, we've touched on the human cost. But what about the lasting effects on Chile's political and economic landscape?
Well, Pinochet's regime, with the help of U.S.-trained economists known as the Chicago Boys, implemented radical free market reforms.
Like what?
Privatization, deregulation, a shrinking of the social safety net.
Uh-huh.
These policies had a profound impact.
Yeah.
Some argue they spurred economic growth.
Right.
Others say they exacerbated inequality and left many Chileans behind.
It's like a real-world experiment with an entire nation as a laboratory.
And politically, the legacy of the coup and the dictatorship continues to cast a long shadow.
Oh, yeah.
It created deep divisions in Chilean society, wounds that are still healing. Even today, debates rage about Pinochet's legacy, about the U.S.'s role, about the trade-offs between economic growth and social justice.
So as we reach the end of this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listener?
Yeah, what's the enduring lesson of this Chilean tragedy? Well, history is never simple.
That's for sure.
It's messy, full of unintended consequences, and often driven by hidden agendas.
Yeah.
The U.S. intervention in Chile is a stark reminder that even the most powerful nations can be seduced by the allure of control.
Wow.
By the belief that they have the right to impose their will on others.
Right.
And that those actions, even if cloaked in the language of freedom and democracy, can have devastating and long-lasting effects.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is.
But also a call to action.
I agree.
To be aware of the forces that shape our world, to question the narratives we're given, and to hold those in power accountable for their actions.
Absolutely.
After all, understanding the mistakes of the past is perhaps the best way to prevent them from happening again.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This deep dive has been a journey.
It has.
Through declassified documents, political intrigue, economic warfare, and human tragedy.
A lot to unpack.
It's a reminder that the past is never truly past, that it continues to shape our present and our future, and that the pursuit of knowledge, however uncomfortable it may be, is essential for building a more just and equitable world.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the U.S. intervention in Chile.
It's been a pleasure.